and welcome. My name is Natalie Smith, and I am your president. And on behalf of the Board of Directors for IREM San Antonio, I want to welcome and thank you all for joining us for our August virtual luncheon. Today, we will be hearing from Ann Kraus with Hemisphere Conservancy, J.M. Gonzalez with HDR about the Hemisphere Redevelopment Project, and Chad Zimmerman and Christine Clayton from the San Antonio River Authority about the transformation of San Pedro Creek. Before we begin, I want to explain how we'll be using the Zoom webinar platform today. All attendees are on mute in order to preserve the sound quality of the recording. Please post all questions in the Q&A box. You may ask questions in the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and we'll review the questions at the end and ask as many as we can before our time is up at the end of today. And if you get disconnected for some reason, please return to the link and click it again to jump back on. If you want to check back later to review the content or share it with your friends, this webinar will be made available on our website at iremsanantonio.org under the Events tab and labeled Webinar Series. And now, Sally Flanagan will lead the pledge and invocation.
Hi, everybody. If you'll join me in the pledge followed by our prayer today. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If you'll bow your heads with me for a prayer. Loving and gracious God, keep us from becoming complacent and forgetful to the needs around us. Remind us that in every aspect of our lives, you have called us to seek justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with you. Amen. And now our industry partner spotlight.
It looks like we may be having some technical difficulties, so just give us a minute, and I apologize. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Art Villarreal, and I'm the bowling committee chairperson. And we wanted to announce the date of our virtual event in lieu of the bowling event due to the circumstances that we're facing right now with the pandemic. We're partnering with High Street Wine Company to have a bottle of wine and cheese board sent to everybody within a 15-mile radius that participates in the event. We'll be sending additional information to all of our members along with the industry partners. So stay tuned for that. Should be coming up pretty soon.
Thank you, Art. And what day is that event?
That is the 18th of September. Sorry, I thought I mentioned that.
I just had to emphasize it. And what time is it?
It is from 3 to 5 p.m.
Okay. And this is taking place of our bowling event, right?
That is correct. So we need full participation from everybody. Hopefully everybody can join us. It's going to be a really fun event. They have some very interesting and fun things lined up for us. So.
Thank you so much, Art, for pivoting. I know that as bowling committee chair, this wasn't your plan, but I appreciate you and your committee being so creative and coming up with a virtual event. And I think everybody can use a fun experience. So thank you for all that you're doing. Oh, and here we have the presentation. Wonderful. So thanks again, Art.
Thank you.
All right, so be on the lookout for that next week. And let's see if we can go to the industry partner spotlight videos.
Hi, my name is Karina Garza, and I'm with Inside Architects. We're a proud IREM industry partner. Inside Architects was founded in 1988, and we're a full-service design firm specializing in interior planning. Some of the more interesting things that have happened during COVID times is that our clients have been asking us for recommendations on motion activation faucets and light switches, as well as more restrictive measures for contractors when being in their buildings. A funny note, I was able to celebrate my daughter's second birthday during COVID time, so hopefully this will be the only COVID party that we have for a very, very long time. Hope you enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Linda Riel and I'm with Natura. At Natura, we create environments where people thrive. What that means is we add plants to your office to beautify the space. A huge benefit to plants is that they help clean the air. They're great for sound masking, and in today's world, we're providing them for social distancing. We also offer the latest trends in living walls and moss walls. We provide holiday decor to brighten your holiday season, which would be wonderful to do for a challenging year that we're having this year. We also offer disinfectant services because we want you to be safe in your environment. All our disinfectant products are hospital grade for your safety. We're now offering a paperless process so you don't have to touch anything when your technician comes on site. They're also provided with all the proper tools, masks and gloves. If I can help enhance your environment, please give me a call.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated those industry partner spotlight videos. We're getting creative here. All right, today I get the pleasure of introducing our speakers. And the first two speakers we're going to hear from today are J.M. Gonzalez with HDR. J.M. is a graduate of UTSA and is currently a section lead for the HDR San Antonio Transportation Group. He has 19 years of experience in engineering, design, and construction of everything from roadways, bicycleways, transit, planning, and more. JM has designed projects for urban and rural roadways, complex interstate corridors, and residential neighborhoods. When he isn't building San Antonio's infrastructure, he is following his two daughters around to club soccer and trying out all the great barbecue Texas has to offer. We're also going to hear today from Ann Kraus. Ann Kraus is Executive Director of Hemisphere Conservancy. She received her undergraduate from the Air Force Academy and went to UT for her master's. And she also recently completed the executive education program with Harvard Business School. She, as Executive Director for Hemisphere Conservancy, she is charged with the creation and direction of the Hemisphere Conservancy, a 501c3 nonprofit, which raises, manages, and allocates philanthropic dollars for park improvement projects. And if her job wasn't cool enough, she was Executive Officer for the Thunderbird team. So please join me, and I'd like to welcome now and hand it off to our wonderful speakers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today and for your interest in learning more about the Transformational Hemisphere Redevelopment Project. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, we benchmarked 36 parks to see what it was that worked and what didn't, so that when we were going to revitalize the site of the 1968 World's Fair, we could learn from other cities. And we want to create our very own Central Park, if you will, right in the heart of San Antonio. After the World's Fair ended in October of 1968, the area basically fell into neglect and became kind of an inaccessible superblock. And with HDR's help, you're going to find out what we're doing with it as we transform it into a 40-acre urban parks district. Our aspirational vision is truly to become one of the world's great public places. Next slide. So for those of you who are familiar with downtown San Antonio, I just wanted to show you the rough street edges of the perimeter, if you will. And you can see that it includes the San Antonio Convention Center in the northeast corner, but the rest of it is pretty much our purview. In the southeast corner, that is UT System property. That's where the Institute of Texas and Cultures is. And then along Cesar Chavez, there are some federal buildings, but there are some land swaps going on in the next couple years, and that will become city property in just a couple years, and you'll see some more development there as well. Next slide. So the 40-acre urban parks district that we're creating and calling Hemisphere, tipping our hat to the 68 World's Fair theme, we are going to be creating 3 different parks that all have a different personality. And so the first one I'm going to tell you about is Yanaguana Garden. The design theme for Yanaguana Garden is play from pre-K to grade, and we're doing a really good job of that. Since opening just about 5 years ago, we've had over 2.7 million visitors come to Yanaguana Garden. It's about a 6-acre footprint and 4 acres of green space, and people really do play there all the time. Of our annual visitors, 84% of them are locals, and they're of every age, ability level, and zip code. So all of San Antonio is represented, as well as other counties and states, and we lost track of how many foreign countries our visitors have come from. It's truly an international spot, but the best part is it's for us locals. Next slide. These are just a couple pictures so you can see people having fun. The park is open 365 days a year from 5 a.m. until midnight to discourage camping, and it's a pretty lively and vibrant spot. Next. We have a series of public-private partnerships going in, and these are on developable parcels. So this is not on the parkland, if you will, but these parcels are adjacent to the park, and they're part of our long-term self-sustainability plan. And what this is here, our first P3 is a 151-unit apartment complex that we did with Area Real Estate, and 50 to 110% of the units are designated for what we call workforce housing. And that is, you know, I just said something wrong. I got to get this straight. 50% of the units are for people who make between 50 and 110% of AMI. And what was really cool about that is for people who work downtown, whether they be teachers or work at a hospital, they can afford to live at Hemisphere, and the rest of the units are market rate. And the best thing is they have a great place to hang out when they're not inside, and the park is always active and vibrant. Next. We're very excited that Yanaguana Garden is one of 8 finalists for the Urban Land Institute's Open Space Awards. And that award program recognizes transformative spaces that have been instrumental in promoting healthy, sustainable, and equitable outcomes in communities. We're very, very proud of this recognition. And if we're the winner in October, we'll be sure to let everyone know. To tell you more about all the hard work behind the scenes, I want to introduce you to my friend JM with HDR.
Thanks, Ann. So as Ann mentioned, Hemisphere pretty much static for a bit after the World's Fair. And there was a little bit of development, but not much. Right around 2012, the city of San Antonio had their bond program, and Hemisphere was selected as one of the recipients of some of the programs of the bond program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Talk about the PER development, the PER preliminary engineering report, which kind of looked at the development from an engineering standpoint. As Ann mentioned, Yanaguana Gardens, I'll touch on that. And then the first project that came out of the PER was the Hemisphere Internal Streets Phase 1 Water Nueva project, which actually at the intersection of Water Nueva is where that 68 apartments is located. And finally, I'll finish off with a little bit of the future infrastructure. Next slide. So when we started looking at the PER, the first thing we looked at was Hemisphere is right in the heart of the urban center of downtown San Antonio. And when we looked at it a little bit closer, we saw that there's minimal connectivity between the businesses and the streets out there. So it was pretty apparent that we needed to establish a street grid. So that's the first thing we kind of identified as an objective. We moved on to looking at constraints. If we're going to put a street grid, we need to make sure it works with the constraints that are out there. Hemisphere has been around a long time, and there's a lot of shareholders that have come in, or stakeholders, I should say, that have come in, as well as utilities and drainage constraints that have come in that were needed to be accommodated for. We then looked at existing and future infrastructure. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of drainage, there's a lot of utilities. If we're going to be planning for developments in the future, we want to make sure that whatever is existing could accommodate it or would have to be improved. And finally, phasing things out. As I mentioned, this was part of the 2012 bond program. We are now in the second bond, 2017, which another project is happening as a result of that. But it has to be phased, and it's not just about finances. It's also about the constraints and making sure things work in order. Next slide. So as you can see, this is probably from about 2010. This image was taken maybe a little bit before that. Market Street hadn't been realigned. The convention center hadn't been demoed on the west side and rebuilt on the east side. And you can see kind of between the convention center and Chavez, there's not much of a street network to speak of. You kind of see a little V there, but there's not a whole lot. Next slide. So this is what we came up with, and really it kind of reestablished the street grid that was in place prior to the World's Fair that allowed for these areas to truly be developed, sectioning them out to allow for parks and developments. The whole point with the streets was not necessarily just to move traffic, vehicles, but it was to move people and more so connect people between Hemisphere and the different parts within it. Next slide. So as I mentioned, constraints. So once we put this street grid down, we had to look at a couple of different items that popped up. One was environmental. There was a lot of really, really old trees, heritage trees, 100-year-old oak trees in place that we didn't want to impact. So we took some opportunity to realign streets not to do that. There's actually a really cool slide that Ann will show later where actually some of those trees were relocated as part of our street project. As far as the right-of-way, there's a lot of constraints out there as well as it pertains to the right-of-way. In the orange there, it's the Institute of Texas Culture, which is operated by the University of Texas. In purple is the federal courthouse and federal property. And in green, the northwest side is Civic Park, southwest side is Yanaguana Garden area, and then right there in the middle is Tower Park. So all these properties, all these right-of-way constraints had to be adhered to when laying out the street grid. And finally, from a historic standpoint, there was historic homes that had been brought on site that were being restored. A lot of them are now places of business. I think there's a yoga studio there. A couple of little restaurants, little pubs, really, really cool, some offices. But they were still historic homes, and we still had to make sure that we preserved them and didn't impact them in any way. Additionally, there was an acequia that ran through the park that we had to be aware of. We knew it was somewhere there from the old maps, but we didn't exactly know where it was located, so we had to be really, really careful not to impact it. We actually found it on the first project and had to do mitigation measures for it. Next slide. So this is kind of shows, this is the completed project of the street project. I just wanted to show the trees, and those trees in the foreground on the picture on the left, those are trees that were relocated from elsewhere within the park. On the far left side, there's a historic home that has been restored. The picture on the right, you can see a large heritage tree that was obviously not relocated, but it was very careful to be aware of and not impact. In fact, when we did the engineering for the streets, we used special soil, structural soil, that allowed the road to be built while preserving the roots and allowing the roots to still take in water without being impacted by the pavement. Next slide. This is one of the historic homes, the half house that's on site that was restored as part of the improvements in Hemisphere Park. Next slide. So again, looking at the infrastructure, what was existing? There was tons of utilities, tons of drainage infrastructure that was in place, but were they suitable for future development, as well as geotechnical constraints? So we looked at it from a utility standpoint. If you can see, you kind of see kind of the network and grid of utilities that are out there. It's a spaghetti bowl. They're all over the place. As far as the drainage goes, there was a lot of localized flooding that we had to plan for. We're going to build developments. The last thing we want to do is them standing in water. So we did some drainage improvements that were planned out. Next slide. This kind of zooms in and gives you an idea of what we're looking at from a utility standpoint. This is right at the intersection of Alamo and Nueva. So each one of these lines represents a utility. And unfortunately, in the field, these lines are not really thin. They could be anywhere from 3 feet wide to, I think there's like a 6-foot sanitary sewer line that it's huge. So you want to make sure that these things stay in place, we plan around them, and they're adequate to provide services for anything that's going to be developed. With that said, a lot of these are active lines, and so we want to make sure that they remained in service until the new lines were brought on board. Next slide. And again, the phasing plan. The phasing has, as I stated, had something to do with finance, but also had to do with the constraints. Right there in purple, when this was first put together, that purple was shown as a later development because of the federal property, the courthouse. Well, now that the courthouse is being built and there's going to be a land swap, that could move forward in the design, as well as the drainage. As we're building our drainage network, we want to build from the downstream, so that got taken into consideration. Next slide. So again, Yanaguana Gardens, as Ann mentioned, it is a destination location for people of all abilities and all ages. It was a privilege as a transportation engineer, and most of my projects are boring, flat roads, to be involved in a project like this. That was a true destination location. It's world-class, it's ever evolving. And my favorite part, it's interactive. It truly sets the tone for the entire park itself. Next slide. And when I say interactive, even though this is the street portion of the project, this is Nueva Street, immediately adjacent to Yanaguana Gardens, and these are chimes that are on the site. So again, keeping the consistency of the character of services for all abilities. I think there's 2 sets of chimes on the project, and there's some bongo drums, but a lot of fun to really encourage people out there that are walking around from one place to the other. Next slide. And this is the Water Nueva project. Again, this is the first street project that came out of the PER. I am kind of kicking myself because I didn't include that in the map as to where the scope of the project was for this, but essentially it is the southwest portion of the project, and really just connected from Alamo Street to the east and to the south over to Chavez. But 100% ADA accessible in every single direction. It's low speed, I believe 5 miles an hour. I don't think you have much traffic out there right now. I mean, even before, we have bollards. They're able to shut down these roads for any types of festival. In fact, when I was going through pictures, one of the pictures that I had was from one of the tricentennial events, and they have all these vendors out there. This beautiful site that's able to accommodate all the activities that Hemisphere puts in place. Next slide. And so what's coming up? Future infrastructure. Right now we are looking at, as part of the 2017 bond program, is Hemisphere Phase 2. It's Hemisphere Boulevard, shown there in blue. And this will allow the connectivity from Water Street, which goes south, to IH-37, and will allow that east-west movement across Hemisphere Park. I guess, Ann, if you want to take it from here and tell us what we have more to see in the future for Hemisphere.
Great. Thanks, JM. Next. So let's look at this map again. So you know about Yanaguana Garden. So the next one will be the Civic Park. That will be the flagship park of San Antonio. The parkland alone of Civic Park will be 9 acres. And if the stars align, we hope to begin construction next summer and then open it to the public the following year. Next. So JM mentioned that the western wing of the convention center was deconstructed. That's what was left behind. You can see the famous Hilton Palacio del Rio that was built for the fair, but that is the plot and the site where the Civic Park will be built. Now the next slide will show you what the vision is for that space. This is as if you were at Market Street looking south down toward Yanaguana Garden. Part of the 9 acres will be a 2-acre lawn that can hold 10 to 15,000 people for if the Pope comes to visit, or if people want to protest safely, or if Mick Jagger wants to come and give a concert. We have a place to gather. And that's something that the designers, GGN, found out when they came to do interviews in San Antonio to see what the community wanted. And we like to get together. We like to party. COVID's kind of tamping that down for right now, but eventually we'd like to get back to doing that. Think about our fiesta events. We like to gather. And so we're finally going to have a gathering spot. Imagine when the Spurs win their next championship, we'll have somewhere to go. Next slide. And then the third park will be Tower Park, and that will be at the base of the iconic structure that you see on our skyline that was built for the World's Fair. We've already begun design work on that, and we hope to open it to the public in 2025. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we get community input when we're doing design. And it's really fun to have different groups that represent all types of San Antonians get together and express what they want to see at their park. That has been a very successful endeavor for us because this is truly a park for the people of San Antonio by the people of San Antonio. And it's great to see and hear what they want, what kind of services they want, what kind of businesses they want. The complete streets where they can, pedestrians, cyclists, and cars driving slowly can all share the road. That all comes about because the community says what they want at their park. And we're so pleased we're able to deliver that. Next. And so the Conservancy, I'll be very brief about basically the 4 things we raise funds for, because one of the misnomers out there is that the city pays for everything. And while the city has provided generous bond funding, that is not enough to execute a world-class vision. So that's where philanthropy comes in. And we raise funds for capital construction, as you can see here. Next. The historic preservation that JM mentioned. So we have 21 historic structures. Some of them were built for the fair, but in this case, this was a house built in the 1800s, and someone was actually living there on East Nueva Street. It was called Goliad Road at the time, but they were living there and they had to leave their home for eminent domain for the fair. And during the fair, that house was used as a restaurant. And then after the fair doors closed, there was no plan. So it fell into decades of neglect. And I'm not kidding when I tell you that there were squatters and feral cat colonies living there when I came to the team 6 years ago. And as you can see, we've done some exterior stabilization work to it. And now we're going to do the interior. And then we'll be able to open a business, and they give us a portion of their leases a portion of their revenues as their lease payment, which we then reinvest in the park. So it's a really cool virtuous cycle. Next. As JM mentioned, we have a lot of environmental initiatives at the park. We do pollinator gardens and we plant trees, but we also have transplanted trees. This one weighed over 110,000 pounds. And it was truly a feat of philanthropy and engineering. We transplanted 31 huge trees to their future site at Hemisphere. And of the 31, 29 are thriving, and that is a really excellent percentage. We're really proud of that. The day Civic Park opens to the public, there will already be shade. Next. And the last thing that we raise funds for are programming. There's always something going on at the park. And due to COVID, we have had to pivot and do a lot of our programming virtually, but we look forward to the day when we can do in-park programming again. But one of the outcomes of the pandemic is that we realized there is a thirst for the virtual programming. And so we intend to keep that up even once the public health crisis subsides. Next. And I would not be doing my job if I didn't tell you that every contribution makes a huge difference. We have a donor panel wall, and it's for people who give $1 all the way up to millions of dollars. It's in alphabetical order. And the reason we do that is because we want San Antonio to know that it takes broad community participation to pull off an aspirational vision like Hemisphere's, and everybody's gift matters. Next. I invite you to come to Hemisphere. My favorite thing to do is to get out of my office and into the park and hear children laugh. And so consider yourself invited. Give me a shout if you want a personal tour. It would be my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anne and JM. That was wonderful. If y'all have questions, don't be shy. Put them in the Q&A box and we'll ask them at the end. Next, I am so excited to get to introduce our next speakers. So we have with us today Chad Zimmerman, and he attended Texas Lutheran for his undergraduate degree and UTSA for his master's. Currently, Chad is a structural section manager in HDR San Antonio's office, and where he specializes in structural design experience in retaining walls, concrete design for above and below grade building structures, building designs in high wind zone regions, and more. If you are looking for someone to join your neighborhood baseball team, Chad is a great pick. He played baseball for Texas Lutheran all through college. Also today, I'm excited to introduce Christine Clayton. Christine is a project engineer with the San Antonio River Authority. She received her undergraduate degree in civil engineering from Rice University. She worked for several years as a design engineer before joining the River Authority as a project manager in 2019. And she has a new and exciting addition to her family since quarantine. She's adopted an adorable puppy named Jax. So thank you so much. And Chad and Christine, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate the intro. Good afternoon, everyone. Chad Zimmerman with HDR Engineering. I'm the structural section manager, as Natalie said. I'm also the project manager for some very exciting projects in Pedro Creek Culture Park. I'll talk to you a little bit about this today. So it's a little description of it. It's a kind of a world-class linear park. Culture Park. It's a 2-mile stretch. It parallels the San Antonio River. It is in the heart of downtown, as you can see, and more importantly, it's the heart of downtown, working downtown, not the heart of the commercial downtown or the more. So next, there you go. The project phasing of this project was originally programmed to be one continuous project, from starting at Santa Rosa Street and going all the way down to Confluence Park, which is at I-35 in Ceballos. But it was broken up due to, mainly due to Tricentennial San Antonio. So those familiar, 2018 Tricentennial celebration of 300 years of San Antonio. So it was broken up into phase 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. And also for constructability reasons, it was done this way. So phase 1.1 goes from Santa Rosa Street, the inlet structure there at I-35. Most of you don't know what the inlet structure is, but we'll get there. And goes down to Houston Street And the next phase, 1.2, which is under construction right now, goes from Houston Street to Nueva Street. And then the 1.3, which is in design, actually under construction right now, just starting construction, is from Nueva to Cesar Chavez. At Cesar Chavez, the creek goes underground in some box culverts, and then reemerges at the outlet structure, which is at El Paso Street, which is phase 2, and stays above ground and all the way to I-35. Phase 2 is from basically, El Paso Street to about the railroad bridge. If anybody knows where the railroad bridge is, it's kind of hard basically between Alamo Street and Cevallos Street, halfway in between there. And then the rest is phase 3. Phase 4 obviously is from Cesar Chavez to El Paso. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And I also wanted to mention that the main reason for this project is to have, say we have the San Antonio River, which is more geared toward tourists. And this project was geared toward, native San Antonians to kind of get them involved with the water of San Antonio, because that's a big part of the culture of San Antonio. So I'll hand it over to Christine right now to kind of explain the other parts of the project and kind of the phases of the project. So Christine? Oh, can't hear you, Christine.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christine Clayton. I'm with the San Antonio River Authority. Thank you all for having us today. As you can imagine, a project of this scale really took a village to make it happen. And it all started with a partnership between Bexar County, the City of San Antonio, and the San Antonio River Authority. Next slide, please. And here's the team that helped to make this, I like to end this comment of aspirational vision come true. HDR led our design team, including Pete Dawson and GDU, and Set Davila Joint Venture is our construction manager that really handles all the construction and makes the execution happen. And our architects for our first 2 phases is Munoz, and moving forward, we have Ford, Powell & Carson and Rialto Studios. Next slide, please. So as this concept started coming to fruition, there were several goals that the partners really wanted to ensure that happened as part of this project. First and foremost, this is a flood control project, but it was also important to us to do everything we could to improve water quality, as well as highlight the rich culture that has existed along San Pedro throughout its history. And community engagement has really been crucial every step of the way. As Chad mentioned, really our goal, everyone is welcome, but really the focus of this park is the community, highlighting the history and really engaging them and getting them excited and giving them something that they will love for years to come. Next slide, please. Next slide. So as I mentioned, first and foremost, this is a flood control project. And how we anticipate in accomplishing that is by widening and or deepening the channel. The ultimate goal is to contain the 100-year flows within the channel banks, which will remove approximately 30 acres and 38 adjacent structures from the floodplain. Another thing that we have included, which is actually not for flood control purposes, it's really more for aesthetics, and our 3 crest gates, really the purpose of them is to pond water, widen the surface area, and really enhance the experience of the user with the water. Next slide, please. So here you can kind of see what the existing floodplain looks like now. Most notably, most obvious is in the second to the right photo. You can see how the 100-year flows aren't always contained within the channel. They often overtop and affect businesses nearby. Next slide, please. So here you can see what the floodplain will look like once all phases of construction are complete. As I mentioned, the ultimate goal is to contain all 100-year flows within the bank. There was also some freeboard added so that there could be future flood control projects that brought flows to San Pedro Creek. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, water quality is also a very important component of this project. So we took every opportunity we can to incorporate various different features. In the open parts, we have aquatic plantings that remove nutrients from the water, floating islands, plants behind walls. So the other item we have is engineered structures. Essentially, they look almost like manholes with filters inside, and they intercept the storm sewers in the streets, and they flush out large debris before it enters the creek. We also have in the next phases that will be opening up, we are incorporating new features such as bioretention ponds and bioretention soils. So we're taking every opportunity we can to clean it as much as we can, hoping to revitalize the aquatic, the environment, so that we can see more of the ducks and the fish and turtles, which is pretty cool to see when you go out there. Next slide. And as I mentioned, culture is another key component. There's such a history, such a rich history from San Antonio, even just in its 300 years since inception, and San Pedro Creek has played a crucial role in that. And some of the ways that we tell this story is through the interpretive signage that are located throughout the park. You can see them all along the creek in the open part, and we'll be continuing it in the phases as they start opening up. And they really tell, how San Pedro played a role in the history of San Antonio and Bexar County. Next slide, please. And art, here's another important way that we tried to tell the history of San Pedro Creek is through art. And we have various media throughout the park, from custom tile artwork to murals, bridge inserts, and word art. Next slide, please. So here's one of our art pieces that is found up at the Plaza de Fundación, which is just north of Santa Rosa Street. It basically is, trying to signify the history of San Pedro. There'll be historic text inscripted on the poles, and when the light hits it just right, it'll cast a shadow on the ground that looks like San Pedro Creek as it was naturally. Next slide. So here's one of our big murals in the open segment of the park. This is by Adriana Garcia, and it's titled From All Roads We Are One, which is a common theme that you see throughout the park and through the murals and the word art. And this specifically tells how the San Pedro Springs really, how life and culture and everything from a lot of important features of San Antonio really came from San Pedro Creek. Next slide, please. This is another mural we have in the open segment from Katie Pell. This is meant to tell a little more about the indigenous people along the creek. Fun fact, it's actually the style of it. Sometimes in our tours we get comments of, was it incomplete or has it faded? This is actually the style of the artist. Next slide. Is another mural by Alex Rubio titled Aqua. Just kind of trying to tie everything together from the Blue Springs and the water, and just kind of another cool way to integrate art into the park. Next slide. Here is another mural by the artist Joe Lopez. It's located off of Houston Street, and it talks a little about the history of the Alameda Theater. Another fun fact I thought was pretty cool when I learned about it is that Joe Lopez was not a trained artist. He hadn't received any formal training, so he executed this art piece just off of natural talent. Next slide, please. These are the bridge inserts I mentioned earlier, done by Diana Kersey. And she uses these to kind of highlight some of the important features of the history or the naming of the bridges, of the streets of those bridges. Next slide. Another artist that we brought on board that you will see to do a lot of the custom tile work that here shown in the picture are the 12 generation benches. And they're supposed to signify the 12 generations that have, come and gone throughout the 300-year history of San Antonio. And you also see a lot of his art, tile art throughout the open segment of the park. Next slide. We also have word art done by John Philip Santos, and he kind of uses various poetic and historical texts to, again, tell the history and really, engage and inform the public of everything that has gone along San Pedro Creek. Next slide. And in the current segment of San Pedro Creek that is nearing completion, phase 1-2 will have a interactive water wall, which is a a feat in and of itself making this happen. It's a little over 250-foot long water wall, which is supposed to be interactive. It's really all about engaging the community. You know, much like we heard from Hemisphere, the chimes and the drums, we also wanted to, you know, it's really important to make this a fun space. It is for the community. So we wanted to engage them, and one way is through this interactive water wall. Next slide, please. So we brought on an artist, Adam Frank, to help us design the artistic elements of this feature. So what it'll essentially be is there's going to be, I think, a 50 style microphone sculpture that'll be in the park, and across from it, along the water wall, there'll be LED lights. So the public can come up to the microphone, they can talk, they can sing, they can play music. And as the microphone is picking up the sound, the LED lights and the water wall behind will change and move in accordance to the sound. So you'll see in lifetime how your sound is changing the wall, which is pretty cool. We've had some trial ones, and it looks really great. We're excited about that. Next slide. And also in the stretch between Commerce and Dolorosa, we're going to have even more murals. This is going to be a set of 5 murals, which is meant to tell the civil history of San Antonio, from the Presidio and the Spanish Governor's Palace and everything, and how, you know, all the rich history of San Antonio and the Alamo and all that great stuff. So we're in the process right now of designing those. Next slide, please. And here, I will pass it over to Chad to talk to you a little more about some of the improvements that have gone on along San Pedro Creek.
Thank you, Christine. Appreciate that overview of the art and everything that's going on with San Pedro. That's really very exciting for everybody involved with the project. And we're hoping that everybody who will appreciate that art and appreciate what's been going on there. So next slide. I wanted to show you some before and after pictures. This picture is actually what I was talking about earlier, the inlet structure. You can see it on the picture on the left-hand side there, in the background, right below I-35. This is the structure of the Plaza de Fundación, which Christine talked about earlier. This is the view of it with the 12th generation benches, and just kind of showing the interactive piece of water here. Next slide. As you can see, you know, you might look at these pictures and say, well, how did you get that water in there, considering there was no water in the channel originally? So, as Christine hinted to earlier, there's 3 hydraulic crest gates that are included with the project, and it basically creates the artificial water stacking that you see there, and kind of activates the space culturally, biologically, just really helps everything. And so it creates that water. Without those gates, you would just get a trickle of water when it was not flowing as raining or anything like that. So next slide. So another picture that highlights, you know, this was a forgotten area of San Antonio, just a little drainage ditch that was San Pedro, as I think a lot of native San Antonians know that San Pedro Springs was feeding this at one time, and it was lush and rich, and that's why you know, San Antonio was such an attractive area, and this area was attractive. But you know, once those springs stopped flowing and San Pedro Creek stopped flowing, you know, it was kind of forgotten. So trying to activate this space again. Next slide. This is views showing the Salinas. You can barely see it in the picture on the left-hand side, but it was the Salinas Bridge. And so kind of to honor that, we put a boardwalk there. That's where Sarah has a lot of their yoga at the park classes right now. So, well, so obviously social distancing is practiced with those now, but next slide. And so this is the phase 1.2 I was talking about. This is, it was original Acosa parking lot. Now it will be a Alameda Plaza. The building On the picture on the left, the building on the right-hand side, that's the Alameda Theater. And so this will be named the Alameda Plaza, kind of a space where people can gather. It'll have some amphitheater style seating. There can be some shows there, whatever it may be. And in the background on the picture on the right, you can see the water wall that Christine talked about. Next slide. So this is a view showing the water wall from Commerce Street. And you can see on the picture on the right-hand side in the background is the new TPR building, which is currently, I think, almost completing construction, very, very close to complete. And so that's against the Alameda Theater. And another neat feature of the water wall is that when people are not speaking or singing or playing into the microphone that Adam Frank's designing, it will be playing the live feed from the TPR, and so the water wall will activate, the lights will activate with that live feed. Next slide. And this is just showing the murals that Christine was talking about. You can see that this area was pretty barren before, and so really just trying to get a space where people can walk and interact with the water and also with the culture of San Antonio. Next slide. So the view on the left-hand side is taken from Cesar Chavez looking upstream. This is kind of where, so basically if you see that little, the weir or that drop off there, what we had to do here was, in order to contain the floodplain and improve, we had to take where that bottom of that weir is, or that drop, and excavate that all the way back up to Travis Street, which was quite a feat, quite an engineering feat. And as you saw in the pictures, there's a lot of buildings around this area. So, as a structural guy, I really it was a very complicated project, trying to work up next to buildings and designing retaining walls next to buildings. So it was quite an exciting project, and also definitely as a structural, very nerve-wracking. So you can kind of see the vision for phase, actually that'd be phase 1.2 there. I'm sorry, 1.3. And on the picture on the right-hand side, the building there in the background on the right-hand side is actually the new Federal Courthouse. And so that project is also involved in the process with us for phase 1.3, developing landscaping and kind of highlighting their building with the creek. Next slide. So this is past El Paso Street, actually Guadalupe Street, and this is phase 2. So this is where the project becomes a little more natural, a little less urban. There's not as many closely spaced buildings, those type of things. So there's going to be a path, a place where people can interact with the water, those type of things. Next slide. This is a little neat feature. So we struggled with this a little bit at the beginning. There's actually the picture on the left-hand side is a culvert, existing culvert where the railroad used to be. And so how we're dealing with that, we're keeping the existing culvert, actually adding on to it and creating a kind of a plaza, if you will, for San Pedro, kind of a park, mini park along the stretch here. So we'll have a shade structure, we'll have an overlook, a wood deck overlook, and some nice plantings. People can rest there, those type of things. And also Sarah has plans for some programs in that area. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier phase 4. Phase 4 is where the culverts go below ground, or where the creek goes below ground. And you can kind of see that where that view right there is at Cesar Chavez looking downstream. So we were looking upstream earlier in that picture, so now we're looking downstream. And basically you don't see anything because everything's below ground at that point. So this rendering actually on the right-hand side is an older rendering. We have come to the conclusion that we're we're not going to open those up. As budgetary constraints and other regulatory constraints have basically prohibited us from doing this. So we're actually going to do it just an above ground trail with lots of trees, lots of benches. It'll be more like a park through this area. So next slide. So everybody likes this. So the economic impacts of this project, studies that Bear County, Sarah have done. The total cost of the project is $175 million, all in phases 1 through 4. The total potential return for this project could be $1.5 billion. And I think we've, if people have been down there, I think they've seen this already of the amount of improvements going on along the creek. The soapworks apartments, they've actually come under new management, and things have improved, really upgraded there. Some of the other areas, Frost Tower is now close to the project. The federal courthouse, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So next slide. So new development, this is what I was getting at here. So the SASD headquarters is actually going in at the head of the project up there by Santa Rosa Street off of Cameron, and that one's coming along nicely. I think they're getting close to at least the exterior of the building getting close to completing. So if you have a chance, you can drive down there and see the SAISD headquarters building. Everybody has probably seen the Frost Tower. Right there, it's right along the creek. I think is actually shown in one of the renderings. Sorry, I didn't mention it earlier, but and then I mentioned TPR, which is the Alameda Theater, which is right across from the Frost Tower on the downstream side. And also, we're in coordination with UTSA right now on their campus right along the creek between De La Rosa and Nueva Street. So that's exciting as well. And as I mentioned before, which is not on here, the federal courthouse is going in next to the project between Nueva and Cesar Chavez. Next slide. So these are just some of the awards that I won't go over all these, but so you can kind of read through these. Some of the awards that this project has won. Obviously, a very great project for the city, and really appreciative of all the efforts of everybody who's been involved with this project. Next slide. And there is a mobile app. If you go down to the open part of the project, phase 1.1, you can log on to your smartphone and download this mobile app, and it'll kind of give you a virtual tour of the project and tell you kind of what's going on, those type of things. Next slide. And as I said, virtual tour, self-guided tours. Next slide. And there is a website for the project, so you can learn more about the project. We just gave you a brief overview. There's a lot more to learn about this project, so if you want to go to the website, you can explore it for yourself. Next slide. And if you want to post anything on social media, there's and they do quarterly construction tours. Those are at a halt right now because of COVID. But I think they're planning on doing some virtual tours, and you can, contact the River Authority or post something to the website to inquire about those. And that's our presentation for today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Chad and Christine. And I know we had those technical difficulties earlier, so we don't have as much time as I was hoping we would at the end for questions. So what I'd like to do is if our panelists would come on real quick, and we're talking to property managers, and that during COVID, everybody's having to figure out how to take full advantage of the outdoor environment. And so I think first for Ann and JM, if a property manager is trying to add life and activity to their outdoor spaces, what's a piece of advice that you would give? Go ahead, Ann. Start.
I'm not a designer, but one of the things that I think is really important is with that design theme of play from pre-K to grade. I think it's really important not to just think of little kids, because the spaces that attract people over and over again have that multidimensionality to it and have layers that engage people of all ages and abilities and interests. And I think that is incredibly important. Something that we offer at Hemisphere, which is, I hope, a new trend, is we have an adult-sized changing table, which doesn't sound like anything to most people unless you have a special needs family member and you've had to change them on a parking lot ground and protect their privacy with a blanket. To be able to have an actual changing table makes those places accessible for all. And I think it's a movement that you're gonna see more of, and it's very important.
Thank you, Anne. I agree. JM, do you have anything to add? You're on mute right now.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think the only thing that I would add is taking a look at your adjacent areas. I was on actually a webinar about complete streets during COVID, and if there's, say, an extra lane adjacent to your property, working with the city, inquiring, can we close that lane and use like temporary, whether it's water barricades or something, just to allow for outdoor seating, space. Essentially, it's expanding your sidewalk by taking in that lane. Obviously, it's something that's temporary during this time, but at the same time, maybe it's something that's done in the evenings off peak that just allows people to expand their frontage in front of their business, their restaurant, or whatever. You need outdoor space, and I thought that was really, really neat.
That's great advice. Thank you, JM. And then Christine, I really enjoyed all of the art that you had. And I think that, a lot of properties may not have a lot of funding to be able to commission an artist. Do you have any advice on how to bring art and life and culture to a space?
Yeah, goodness. Okay, I'll try to talk about it. It's an engineer talking about art. But I know, we got lucky in this project when we brought on an art curator to help us engineers really figure out how to activate this space. And we've had, like I said, it's a big collaboration with the city. And we have found various ways of incorporating art. Yes, there are some more expensive murals and features that, we were lucky enough to get funding from our partners. But, we have found ways that really anyone can do it, between like drum circles or yoga, or, once we get at Culver Park, we're planning on doing movies in the park, having a loom, just putting up Christmas lights, inexpensive Christmas lights as a feature to really bring out people, having local performers. We close down streets and have performers. So not knowing the details of that, there's so many things that we can incorporate in everything we do. A lot of our artists are local artists. We really focus on that. So, giving San Antonio a voice through art basically is what we're trying to do. So I hope I answered at least part of the question.
It's kind of a hard one, I think.
Yeah.
So, I just think it was very inspiring. And then Chad, I'll say every water feature I've ever had at a property, I've had an issue with, right? There's always something that goes wrong. Do you have any advice for property managers? I mean, the ambiance that water brings, though, is just unparalleled, right? The feeling it creates and the sound and all of that, it's all the senses are engaged. So I think property managers are also going to be tasked with, we could use some water over here. Do you have any advice?
So yeah, water features are very difficult, and even so, we've struggled with some of the water features in San Pedro. Actually, right now we're going through some issues with algae growth, and this is a fact that we're actually using stormwater for this project. It's not potable water per se. So we've had some issues with algae growth and such. So water features are a little difficult, but I would say advice: really think about your materials you're putting in to structure that. Think about where you're putting that. And also really think about what it's doing and how it serves the people that are coming into your space. Don't just think of it as a feature for something pretty to look at. at least for our project, you know, it's something that people can hopefully interact with. So, you know, I just really think about for owners that, you know, think about something that people can interact with and really, otherwise it's just something that's, you know, it's pretty, but something that people look at.
Mm-hmm. There's a million more questions, and I know Tom asked a question about phase 4, but I think you kind of answered the underground portion, and I thought that was really creative. And we are going to schedule tours of both Hemisphere and San Pedro Creek in the fall, and we're going to figure out how to do that safely. But you know, if all our membership can stay tuned for that, I'm so excited about that. And I just want to thank you all one more time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, y'all are wonderful. And so to close it out today, we have one more nod to our 30 under 30 award recipients. We are so proud to have 4 from our little city of San Antonio on this international level. So congrats to everybody there. And then a few reminders. So if you enjoyed today's presentation, you can check it out on our website, or if you want to share it. Also, we've got our big fun event for fundraising for our chapter on September 18th. Our next virtual program is in October, and it's going to be the induction of our board members and committee chairs, and we'll have a sustainability roundtable. I'm really excited about that. And then November 12th, we're going to hear about Oxbow and Credit Human, the development of the Broadway office project from Alan Sykes with Pearl. And to stay up to date on everything, like us on Facebook, connect with us on LinkedIn, feel free to visit our website. Thank you all for joining IREM San Antonio today. This meeting is adjourned.